and good afternoon, everyone. The Employment Department's Research Division continues closely watching how businesses and workers are responding to this next phase of the pandemic. As the agency's return to work efforts have ramped up, we're hearing directly from people who have been affected by the pandemic itself or are experiencing difficulty getting back on the job due to either remote schooling or a lack of available childcare. And like you, we're also hearing firsthand and seeing reports of businesses reporting difficulty finding workers as they look to reopen or expand their operations. And in the middle, Oregon had about 84,000 workers in April who are and have been on the job, but are working part-time, even though they'd prefer a full-time schedule. And that could be either due to a lack of foot traffic or lack of demand at the business where they work, or due to household obligations. Heading into the pandemic, there were about 350,000 workers in Oregon's labor force who had children present at home and also had a job that needed to be worked in person, and all available adults in the household were working. Now, as of last week, 2/3 of Oregon's K-12 schools were still in partial or full remote learning. That means that for at least part of the week, those children are still learning at home. Remote schooling or a lack of available childcare can create difficulty, especially in those households where all of the available adults were working before. And as we see ourselves coming into summer break, we're likely to see that continue to create some difficulty in Oregon's labor market. And it's particularly difficult for them because in our job vacancy survey, we know that 4 out of 5 jobs are for full-time positions. And the bulk of those are jobs that need to be done in person on the job site. Now, despite household constraints or other barriers, hiring demand is just as strong or stronger than it was prior to the pandemic. And as Oregon's economy continues to move towards more fully reopening, we're seeing businesses increasingly compete for available workers. This trend's also likely to continue. And that competition for workers is creating a job seekers market where workers can get multiple job offers. It can bid up wages within a sector and across sectors of the economy. And we start seeing signing bonuses and those other incentives that employers start putting out there in order to attract and retain talent. The Employment Department is also continuing to investigate the ways that the pandemic recession has affected Oregon's workforce differently across different demographic groups. And in the coming weeks, we expect to have more information to share about the unique ways that the pandemic recession has affected Oregon's workforce, particularly women, younger workers, workers from Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, and lower wage workers across all sectors of Oregon's economy. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our acting director, David Gerstenfeld, to talk about the ways that we're helping all impacted Oregonians and all workers who are looking to make that first step back into the labor force or to their next career opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail, for that information about Oregon's economy and the state workforce needs and issues. I do have some updates to share today about job seeking. We know that a lot of Oregonians are looking for jobs now, as well as exploring new training opportunities or discovering a new career path. The Oregon Employment Department, as a key partner in local job centers called WorkSource Oregon, supports workers and businesses as our economy rebuilds and as businesses reopen. And as Gail mentioned, we know the pandemic has impacted Oregonians in different ways. Our WorkSource Oregon staff can provide one-on-one help to make sure that everybody gets the support they need to find a job, and that's whether or not they ever applied for or received unemployment benefits. We're reminding people that work search and related requirements are turning back on in phases, starting with registration in iMatch Skills, Oregon's online job matching system. iMatch Skills links registered employers with the state's largest pool of qualified candidates. And because about 220,000 people may need to register using its simple online process, we're notifying claimants in waves to make sure they can get help if needed and connect with a WorkSource Oregon employee. If people do not register on iMatch Skills by the deadline in their letter, their benefits will stop. Most people should be able to complete the registration process on their own, and we've provided some tools on our website to help people as well. The first set of letters has gone out this week and will go to about 40,000 UI claimants. We're also directly reaching out to people who have requested services in languages other than English to provide language assistance as needed. Right now, the IMATch skills registration requirement is for people receiving regular unemployment insurance, UI, or pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, PEUC, and that includes people that are filing new claims or restarting prior claims in those programs. We'll have more details about these types of requirements for people getting pandemic unemployment assistance benefits later this week. But in general, PUA claimants who are not self-employed will have the same requirements as people receiving regular UI or PEUC benefits. For self-employed PUA claimants, they will be required either to follow the same requirements as people that are receiving regular UI do if they are looking for jobs as an employee, or if they intend to continue their self-employment venture, they'll be required to maintain records of what they're doing for their business, the work that they're doing to further their business, including to reestablish it if it was damaged by the pandemic. And we'll be giving more details to people directly who are receiving PUA benefits about these requirements, as well as putting more information on our website soon. And there will be some updates as well to the weekly PUA certification questions to reflect these changes. And I'd like to remind people that they do not have to wait to get a notice from us to get help finding work. Our unemployment.oregon.gov/return to work landing page has more information, and that includes IMATch skills step-by-step guide and registration for our next webinar, where we'll share more information on work search and related requirements and the support that we're offering as part of WorkSource Oregon. That webinar is scheduled for June 10th at 1 p.m. Also wanted to share a few quick updates about benefit programs. MEUC, which is the Mixed Earner Unemployment Compensation Benefit Program, is up and running, and we are paying MEUC benefits. We estimate that about 400 people so far have been found eligible for MEUC benefits. Also this week, we began paying benefits to those who are now eligible due to the passage of House Bill 3178. And as a reminder, this legislation expands benefit eligibility to people who work part-time. Before, some people were not eligible for benefits because they earned more in a week than their weekly benefit amount. House Bill 3178 allows more people to get benefits in these situations. It was effective first for last week, and those are the benefits that we're paying out this week. So from now through the end of this year, anybody who works less than full-time and earns up to $300 a week may be eligible for benefits. Anybody who thinks that they are now eligible for benefits should file a claim so we can determine their eligibility and get them benefits. And to provide a recap on the total benefits the Employment Department has provided since the pandemic began, from March 15th of last year through May 29th of this year, we've paid $9.4 billion to over 591,000 people, covering 14 million weeks of benefits. Last week, we paid $114 million to 143,000 people. And now that we've implemented House Bill 3178 and are able to pay benefits to more people who are working less than full time, I'm very, very pleased to say that we've implemented every federal and state benefit program created or changed during the pandemic, and there have been many of them. Together, these benefit programs have created a critical safety net that has helped and continues to help people get back on their feet. We're still very busy with lots of behind the scenes work to make these programs operate as required, but are happy to be doing this and to be helping our economy recover. As we move closer to full employment, we'll continue helping workers find a new position or new career, and we'll help employers find qualified people who can help them reopen, rebuild, and grow their businesses. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Now we are opening the lines to members of the media to ask questions. We will call on you in the order you RSVP'd. Please make sure you state who you are directing your question to. And as a reminder, if you're joining us by phone, be sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself. And if you don't get your question answered, please email oed_communications@oregon.gov. And so the first up is going to be Peter Wong with Pamplin Media.
Hi, I think Gail can answer at least the first question today. When the state economist presented a report to the legislature on May 19th, I think Mark McMullen projected that Oregon will reach pre-pandemic employment levels by the fourth quarter 2022. Does that jive with what you're seeing, and what kinds of jobs are more likely to come back later in the recovery period, and what kinds of jobs are coming back sooner?
Thank you, Peter. That's a good question. And I'm glad that the Office of Economic Analysis gets to do the forecasting more than me.
Because they have numbers too. They have other money numbers to do that you don't have to do. So,
well, they do project actually for each major sector of the economy, the employment levels for the next 10 years. Just roughly, I will say that yes, they are anticipating that we are going to see the return of pre-pandemic employment at the end of 2022. And we're certainly poised to see strong growth happen as Oregon's economy continues to more fully recover. In terms of what types of jobs we expect to come back, I know that there is a tremendous amount of pent-up demand in leisure and hospitality, and we have a lot of ground to regain there. Looking in the longer term, healthcare leads Oregon's economy in the long term, just between demographics and the consistent growing need for healthcare over time. We expect that to be the greatest area of demand in the longer term.
all right. And David, if you can refresh my memory, after the Great Recession, obviously this recession was different because we lost a whole lot of jobs at once, as opposed to the Great Recession where it took several months for Oregon to lose that number of jobs. Can we expect a more typical pattern of recovery here in terms of job gains? I know there was that pause we talked about in the April report after some very strong gains at the first part of the year, and then somehow in April they leveled off. Can we expect waves of growth starting again, or is this going to be a kind of a steady thing?
You know, it's a good question, and we did have, you know, close to 2 years worth of kind of a downward progression in the Great Recession to reach the peak unemployment levels, and we reached that in, you know, a couple of weeks this time. The recovery looks to be more typical than the onset of the recession, but still not like the Great Recession. We've already seen really drastic, very rapid reemployment, much quicker rebounding. Gail has shared in the past that we've seen, you know, several years worth of jobs recovered in about 7 months, the pace that we've seen. So it's going much quicker. That may be turning more towards a more typical recovery now. The economists have talked a lot about the square root recovery when you look at what it looks like on the chart. And it does look like the growth that was so rapid is slowing down to be maybe more typical growth. And that does mean that we're back in the economic cycle to where we're seeing some of that upward wage pressure, things that were there before the onset of the pandemic, that kind of competitive labor market that Gail was talking about, where there's the ability for workers to get competing job offers within an industry or across different types of jobs. So it won't be a typical recovery, but we think it's moving to be closer to more similar to a typical recovery, certainly, than the onset of the recession was.
Okay, thanks.
Next up is Mike Rogoway with the Oregonian.
Hey, David. Hey, Gail. Thanks for doing this today. I want to ask a question again. I've asked David in the past, but I think both of you might have some insight onto it. The number of new Oregon claims, regular and UI, has remained pretty elevated over the past several weeks, even as the national numbers have steadily moved down. So I've done some poking around to see if I can figure out anything more about what's going on. And when I talk to claims processors, they tell me they think one reason, or maybe the reason, why Oregon claims aren't falling faster is because of high levels of fraud. They think many of the claims that we're recording right now, not necessarily ones we're paying, but the ones that we're recording, are fraudulent. And I realize, David, you're reluctant to talk too much about fraud, but I think this is something important for us to understand economically. I had one claims processor tell me that 80% of the claims he sees he flags for fraud. and he thinks it's similar among his colleagues. Is that right?
So we certainly are seeing ongoing attempts to defraud the system, and it's not 80%, but a significant number of new claims are people attempting to file fraudulent ones. And as you pointed out, Mike, that doesn't mean that that those are claims that are being paid out on, but it means that people are continuing to try to defraud the system. Unfortunately, some of them are able to get some benefits. So I do think that that is one piece of what's reflected in the numbers, that we're seeing people still try to steal money from the trust fund. I don't think that that explains all of it. We're still seeing, compared to before the pandemic, a pretty high number of new claims being filed. And certainly as kind of the impact of the pandemic hits businesses, so some businesses do have to shut down or are still curtailed. So there are individuals that are losing their jobs. There's always some number of new claims being filed, regardless of economic circumstances, just as people have to move to be with their family or other circumstances happen and they're temporarily unemployed. So I think that our numbers we're still seeing a significant number of new initial claims being filed. Some of what's reflected in the data are those attempts to defraud the system, but that's not the whole story.
Would you say that it accounts for the difference in declining rates between Oregon and the nation as a whole?
I don't think so, and partially because Oregon isn't the only state seeing a large number of initial claims being filed attempting to commit fraud. Other states are seeing that also. And certainly the attempted fraud isn't evenly distributed each week or each month across the different states, but the criminals unfortunately are targeting every state. So at various points in time, different states are being hit, multiple states at a time. But there's always some of that going on in all of the states.
Are there any guesses then from either you, David, or Gail, as to what our picture actually looks like? In terms of the declining rates, like this past week, PUA and UI, we had 10,244 claims filed. I mean, that's up from January when the state was shut down and there were 9,800 new claims a week being filed. Last summer, we were having as few as 4,000 new claims being filed, or 5,000. I'm just trying to sort out, where we are economically.
Right. I would say I think that's one of the reasons why maybe looking at the unemployment rate for looking at overall trends might be a better measure. The data that we have when you're looking at the new claims being filed, last summer, nobody had exhausted their claims. And so such a large percentage of the state was already unemployed that there were not that many new initial claims to be filed. Any of those people that are now needing to continue getting benefits if their old claim expired or was used up, they are filing a new claim. So I think that's one reason for part of the difference. And of course, the PUA claims are kind of, it's a new program and new data that there's not a lot of historical basis. The way that the unemployment rate is computed isn't based on the claims filing data. So that tends to be more consistent across time when new programs are created and these other issues come up. Although I will say, just because of the not typical nature of the recession that we're in with the pandemic, even the unemployment rate probably doesn't fully capture all of the economic circumstances. And I don't know if Gail has anything to add or if I have learned enough listening to her to answer that.
Thanks. To add on to what David said and to Mike's question, I do think that we've seen the dynamic shift recently, where in April we saw that those who had experienced permanent job losses were the largest group of the unemployed in Oregon for the first time. So that's been something that's changing over time. And just to reiterate what David said, in that the unemployment insurance claims, sometimes they fluctuate for reasons that aren't related to the economy. It could be because, it's a Friday and it's beautiful outside that we saw claims decline during a week or something like that. So they're not always strictly linked, although they do tend to be a pretty decent 1-point indicator for us before the traditional labor market data can catch up sometimes.
Thanks to you both.
Next is Keaton Thomas with KATU.
This question is going to be to David. David, thanks for taking the time. Your communication staff provided me some information here either last week or this week about overtime. So I guess, I noticed, I think overtime at your agency was up like 1,000% compared to 2019, which I obviously expect with you, as you guys deal with all of the claims. So I guess, first of all, can you describe the spike in unemployment, which staff or like which department maybe were the ones who were working the most overtime, and also how the Oregon Employment Department is paying for all of this?
Sure. In terms of who it impacted, it really has been pretty much the whole agency. And those are the people that initially come to mind, the people answering the phone, the people doing the behind the scenes, working on claims to get benefits paid, to resolve issues. It's been our IT staff implementing all these programs, our communication staff working on putting material out, HR trying to hire huge numbers of new people, our accounting. It really has been across the board where people have been working overtime, and people have been doing, people whose normal job wasn't necessarily working with benefits have been doing that and have also been working overtime. In terms of how we're paying for that, most of the money for running the unemployment insurance system typically comes from the federal administrative grant. That amount, even in normal times, isn't enough to cover all of the administrative costs. So we do have some other state funding streams that we use. None of it is state general fund for running the unemployment insurance program. And during this recession, there were also a number of additional federal allocations of money to help states pay for the administration, including overtime, new employees, contractors. The first federal legislation that really dealt with this, the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, allocated significant amounts of funding so that states could immediately start staffing up. So it is a significant expense. And frankly, the overtime figures that you're looking at are probably for overtime pay. So that doesn't reflect all of our salaried employees that have also been working a lot of overtime to try to meet the need and get benefits to people as quickly as we can.
And then my follow-up question to this is, I have a monthly breakdown. For example, I noticed that, as like the number of initial claims filed and continuing claims filed has gone down, since its peak, end of last year-ish. I noticed even in April, there was still a significant amount of money that was paid out in overtime. So why would the agency still be spending so much in overtime, even as things improve economically throughout the state?
Well, things certainly are improving. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that our work isn't done, and there's kind of two main pieces to that. We've been talking a lot about reemployment. So we're shifting. There are fewer people needing benefits right now. So there's a lot more effort being put on helping people that are unemployed find jobs, overcome barriers that may be preventing them from getting back to work, helping businesses find workers. That's a significant amount of work. I mentioned the 220,000 people that were getting registered into the IMAX skills system. And also, although the number of new claims filed has gone down quite a lot, the number of people receiving benefits is still very high. So I mentioned, I believe it was 143,000 people last week. That would make it the fourth largest city in the state that every week is receiving benefits. And each one of those, it's a weekly eligibility program. So that's a person looking at the claim. There's still an enormous amount of work. The other big factor that goes into that is we've talked for quite a while about how the more straightforward work we're able to hire and train people pretty quickly to handle. But as more programs have been added, as people's circumstances have changed and the systems have become more layered and more complex over time, there are still a limited number of people that have the really detailed experience and expertise in all of the programs to do some of the work that's needed. And those people continue to be putting in a lot of hours, working incredibly hard to handle those complicated things. And we're continuing to hire to try to ease that burden on our staff and to make the customer service more consistent over time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, so next up is Dick Hughes with the Hughesisms.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of follow-up questions for Mr. Gerstenfeld. David, first of all, you just used the example of the equivalent of Oregon's fourth largest city. Is that the total number of people receiving benefits each week, or the number of new claims each week? I wasn't sure which I heard, and I wanted to make sure I understood.
I was referring to the people that are receiving benefits each week. So most of those people are not new claims being filed, but there's still work each week for us for each week that someone continues to seek benefits.
Got it. Then my other question is, I'm guessing that since the 40,000 letters just went out this week, that you don't have a sense of how that has had an effect on whether some people who were reluctant to return to work have now returned to work, or whether that's affected the job situation at all.
No, we don't. And I think it'll probably take a little bit of time because it's a large number of people. It takes some time for that to show up in the number of people seeking benefits. And also a lot of the people that are receiving benefits now have not been through this process before, which is one of the reasons that we're doing this, phasing it in so that we can provide that assistance to help them. So there may be some people, and certainly we think most people are doing what they can to get back to work. But some of them, it may take them some time to do the registration because they are new to the process and maybe reaching out to us to get assistance doing that.
Thank you very much for your explanations.
Next up is Kate Davidson with OPB.
I think Kate's question, if I can. This is Rob Manning at OPB. And I wonder if there's any insight that you've been able to gather from the, just what initial responses you've gotten from people, or even just what people are saying in claims around how significant of a barrier to searching for work are issues such as childcare availability, as opposed to, people saying obviously that like, well, people are getting so much on unemployment, they don't want to go back to work. Are you hearing that in terms of just conversations that people are having with claims folks?
A good question, Robin. We hear a lot of that anecdotally, and it's hard without some good data to point to know kind of the relative impact of those different factors. We do know that the research that's been done shows that the amount of available childcare in the state is still significantly below what it was at the onset of the pandemic, and that in many parts of the state, it was a challenge to have adequate childcare opportunities even before the pandemic began. So we do know that that's a big factor, and that's certainly something that we're hearing. We're hearing from some employers that they believe people aren't accepting jobs or looking for work as actively because of the level of benefits. And we, again, will point out that if someone is turning down a job just because they will get more on unemployment, that's something that we want to know about so we can look at it. We don't think that that's the biggest issue by any means, and we're not hearing these comments in a way that makes it look like the biggest issue. Another significant factor that we're hearing about is people that have concerns about their health or the health of someone in their household. So they may be concerned about going back to the type of environment that they worked in before, since the pandemic is still going on.
And if I could, I would just echo David's comments and also say it's difficult for us to parse out how much of each of the things that are going on, because there are several conflating factors happening in the labor market at the same time. How much is assigned to each one? We know at least in a few areas east of the Cascades, they're already back to their pre-pandemic employment levels. And so they're facing actual just competition. And those are some of the same places where we see employers saying that people are turning down jobs that they've accepted otherwise because after the fact they couldn't find childcare, or where they're offering, $25 an hour for housekeeping staff, which is significantly above any benefit levels. So in some of those areas, there's really just competition that's happening, and there really just are labor shortages. And then in other areas, in terms of health concerns, we know that in the first quarter of 2021, there were about 45,000 Oregonians, which would be a pretty robust year of job growth if all of them were taking jobs, that they were sitting out the labor force due to COVID-19 concerns. So we know that at least up until recently, there's been some real hesitation there, and there's a magnitude to that. And we expect to see a lot of these things easing the COVID concerns as vaccination rates continue to increase, and the remote schooling going back to mostly, if not entirely, full-time in person in the fall. So we expect to see those things easing up as we get into fall.
Okay, thank you.
Next question is from Lindsay Nadrich from Coin.
Hi, I think my question is for Gail. So I did interview a restaurant owner today who said he is having a hard time filling some positions, and brought up all the things that you mentioned, health concerns, is wondering if people are making more on unemployment and that's why they're not coming back. But also, I don't know, with the service industry in particular, are you seeing people not wanting to return to that? Like, it's a hard job that maybe some people are now pivoting and doing other things, specifically with the service industry in general. Do you think that we're going to see less people going back to that, or is there any data that shows that?
Yours is a great question, Lindsay, and we have seen, particularly related to leisure and hospitality, specifically restaurants, bars, accommodation, food services portion of that. We were able to go and look at those who were working in accommodation and food services in the first quarter of 2020 and see where they had gone by the end of the year. And we saw that about 12,000 workers who were in accommodation and food services had gone on to jobs in either retail or transportation and warehousing. And so in addition to leisure and hospitality itself, adding about 15,000 jobs over the course of the last 2 months, which is more than 5 times the rate that Oregon's overall economy was adding jobs prior to the pandemic. So they're competing amongst themselves, and they're also seeing people leaving and taking jobs in other sectors. And some of those big employers in retail and in transportation and warehousing advertise pretty high starting wages, and some with benefits as well. So it is just increasing the competition if those employers are in your community.
And then I know David touched on this a little bit, but reiterate for me, you don't think the fact that people are making more on unemployment, that's not the biggest reason people aren't returning to work yet?
We know that's a factor. We went back and looked again at people who are receiving regular unemployment insurance benefits and saw that in the first quarter of 2021, that unemployment insurance benefits averaged $670 a week. And on average, that was full wage replacement for those who were receiving it in the quarter. So it's not to say that it's not a factor, but as I mentioned before, when we're seeing higher wages than that being offered in the competitive market right now and areas of the state that are back to full employment, there are other things that are at play too.
Thank you.
And our final question is from Genevieve. Is it Reaume from KATU?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it. This question is for Gail. With summer ahead, do you think students home on break can help those in the hospitality industry struggling to rehire? Is it worth it for a company to hire someone part-time for a full-time position just to get employees in the door?
I think it is a fantastic opportunity right now for anybody who is looking for a job, part-time, full-time, or permanent. As I mentioned before, we are looking at a job seekers market where there is the opportunity, I think, for people who are looking for work to have a greater opportunity to get into it. In terms of employers' opportunities, I think it depends on what type of business and what type of industry they're in as well. And those who are hiring seasonal employees might find in some of those candidates as well. And again, just think it's a great time for people who are wanting to be getting a job to be out there looking.